So there's a lot of advice out there on walking, and although some of it sounds super helpful, some of the walking advice out there could be holding you back. And so, in today's video, we're gonna go through some of the most common advice that most of you are getting regarding your walking, and maybe clear the air a little bit on whether or not this is actually good advice and helping you or not. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara, I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and on this channel we talk about anything and everything related to mobility, health, fitness, and mindset with the end goal of empowering you with as many tools as possible to take full ownership of your rehab and your overall health. And all that said, let's dive right into the most common things that people tell me they hear that I don't necessarily think are actually helping you to walk more efficiently and with a smoother walking pattern. And the first and the most common thing is to use an assistive device on your strong side. Many of you are getting what we call a HEMI Walker to use in your strong arm immediately following your stroke. Now, why is this maybe not the best advice? So a HEMI Walker has a huge base on it. It's basically like walker made specifically for people that have had a stroke. Seems like a great idea. I'm sure whoever invented it thought it was a great idea. I'm sure we all thought it was a great idea many, many years ago. But what we have learned is that when you give someone a lot of stability on their strong side, they compensate harder. So especially in the very, very early stages, the last thing we want to do is make someone feel super, super secure, leaning towards their strong side. Now, the reason this becomes problematic down the road, and this is a controversial topic and not all therapists agree on this. So this entire video is really just based on my experience and these are my opinions. But let me just be clear that I don't think any therapist is wrong. And I do take this on a case-by-case basis with certain patients. But in most cases, if someone starts out on a device that is that stable on their strong side, it is very hard to ever unlearn that. Those weeks and days and weeks after a stroke is when the most learning goes on and is when you develop the most habits. So people that start on a HEMI Walker very, very early on in recovery, at best maybe get to a quad cane. And again, that's just my personal experience. What's a quad cane? A cane, it's basically just like a single point cane that you see all over town, but it's got like 4 little legs at the very base of it, right? That at best, they can sometimes get to a quad cane. Why? Because they've learned how to use that side of their body for everything. So that's mistake number 1. How would I do things differently very early on with someone? If I had 2 caregivers, I would do like a handhold assist on both hands and again, this is probably just more for therapists, but those of you that are caregivers could definitely try this, where I'm allowing someone to use their strong hand on my hand, but I'm not allowing them to use it too much. The other thing that some of us therapists like to do early on is use a 2-handed device and strap someone's uninvolved hand to the walker so that you're getting a little bit more symmetry. Now, if you're later on in recovery, the way that I usually recommend to address this issue if someone's heavily leaning towards that side because they started off on a HEMI Walker is switching and putting the HEMI Walker more in front of someone and not letting them put it on the side. So some people will absolutely refuse to get off of that HEMI Walker. So what I would do sometimes, and it's effective sometimes, is just switch it and put the HEMI Walker directly in front of someone. So give those a try. And then in the very late stages, which I do have someone that's in this category now, instead of like a 4-legged device, we switched to like a walking stick. Now, any of you that have been around the channel for a while, you know I talk about like a hiking stick quite frequently. The reason for that is it still gives someone stability, but it's not as much stability as a HEMI Walker. And then what we do is we gradually move that to the center of their body, kind of how we do how I just mentioned with the HEMI Walker. So mistake number one, using a one-handed device. Worst one of all is a HEMI Walker. Number two is any AFO will work. AFO stands for ankle foot orthosis. Many times you are given one of these in the hospital, which isn't always best because you're still healing quite a bit. But many facilities, they don't do a proper assessment. They just throw on you what we call like an off-the-shelf AFO, and that's just not appropriate. For example, I had someone recently that left inpatient, went directly to outpatient, and the main goal in outpatient was to work on walking speed on a treadmill. She started to walk a little bit faster on the treadmill, and she couldn't because her leg kept stiffening up. So what do? They just slapped like a very standard, not articulated AFO on her ankle. I don't think it was the most appropriate AFO for her, but it fixed the foot from stiffening up and catching. And so they just continued walking with that on. It's a fixed AFO. She doesn't really need to be in a fixed AFO. Now, I'm not giving recommendations on the type of AFO, but just know I've made lots of videos on this, but there are tons of AFOs out there, and how you design that AFO is absolutely essential to your walking. So work with a good orthotist. Best case scenario is that you're working with an orthotist and a physical therapist, that they're listening to your goals and what you want to do, and that if it's not fitting appropriately, that they're also listening to that as well, and that they're trying a bunch of different things with you. So that's my advice, but I've made full videos on some of the things I would look for and pay attention to in the best AFO. Definitely you can learn more about that in some of the other videos, but biggest mistake is they just throw you in, a lot of therapists just throw you in like an off-the-shelf AFO. The other mistake is that on the topic of AFOs, a therapist tells you that you don't need to wear it anymore. So I think that's not the best advice. Now, there is a time when someone will start to demonstrate that they're not catching their foot, they're not going into like a spastic pattern when they're walking, and that will start weaning someone off an AFO. But my opinion is that you never throw that AFO away, because the times that I have seen that where people were very black and white and they were in the AFO and they were out of the AFO is that you end up with worse spasticity down the road. Because like, let's say, for instance, you're in an environment where it's a little bit more crowded, it's a little bit busier, and you're a little bit more afraid of falling or whatever, and your spasticity starts to creep back in and the compensations start to creep back in slowly, and you never go back to wearing your AFO, and then over time that spasticity gets worse and worse and worse. So best case scenario is that you get to a point where you maybe don't need to wear an AFO all the time, but maybe you still wear it out in public and you just don't use it in your house and you practice walking in your house. But there should always be the thought process that you keep that AFO. Why is that? We know spasticity never goes away completely. So I'm really talking about those of you that have a lot of spasticity after your stroke. We know that it never goes away completely. And so it's always humming in the background. Best case scenario is you get that volume turned way down on that hum, but it's still there. And remember, my belief is that spasticity is a default mechanism that's in our brain, that an involuntary contraction is better than no contraction at all, because spasticity only occurs after damage to your brain or your spinal cord. So I think it's like a default code that's just there as a backup plan. So that backup plan is always there, and it always has the potential to reemerge. So if you are someone that's weaning off your AFO, you have to be more hyper vigilant about those compensations coming back. And when they do start to creep back in, know that you should probably go back into your AFO for maybe like a week or two, just to make sure you're not becoming over reliant again on those compensations. And here's a big one, and most of you will know this one because I talk about it quite a bit on this channel, that walking speed is the most important thing, and that you should not really worry about quality movement. or like the quality of your walking, that doesn't matter as long as you can walk fast. That's all that matters. A lot of you know this because that's exactly what you did in therapy, and that's the only thing that they measured in therapy. Now, I will say there's a time and a place for walking speed. One is if you're sitting in a wheelchair all the time because you're afraid of falling, getting your walking speed up is correlated with a decreased risk for falls. And so if the option is either sit in a wheelchair all the time or forget about quality, making your walking look smooth and just get the steps in, I would absolutely say quality. But many of you are not in that category. You have 0 falls. You haven't fallen since your stroke, or maybe you haven't fallen in like 6 months. You feel awkward when you're walking, and you have the time to work on quality movement, and it's not going to jeopardize your overall fitness. There's many of you that are in that category where working on walking speed in therapy, I just don't think is the best use of that therapy time, especially if this is your 3rd or your 4th round in therapy and your stroke was 5 years ago and you haven't reported any falls and you walk in the community, maybe with an assistive device. I don't think there's any value in working on walking speed in that scenario. The next one is heel toe. Heel toe. I hear this all the time. I feel like everyone gives this suggestion. Heel toe, walking. Honestly, I used to give that cue quite a bit. I do not think it's effective. When you say toe, especially for those of you that have spasticity, when you say toe, you're gonna point your foot. For those of you that have spasticity, you're already pointing your foot. Maybe too much. More than that, when you think about toe, you don't have enough time to lift your foot. So it's a very quick thing, but it's almost kind of hard for me to explain. But when you say toe, your foot's going to point down, right? What most of you are having problem with is you're having problem lifting your foot up. So the part of that gait cycle where you're thinking about pointing down, that's taking away time from the milliseconds that it takes for you to lift your foot up. So what does that look like? Is you have a delay in lifting your foot up because you have to go from toe right back to heel, right to lifting your foot. So I say eliminate the toe altogether. Heel, 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 heel. That's what I tell people. You don't need the toe. Toe is just taking milliseconds away from you activating the muscles that lift the foot. So heel, heel, heel. My opinion, think that that's a better cue. The next one on the list is strengthen your glutes. I hear this all the time, and I get this in many forms. Sometimes it's people just saying like, I need to strengthen my glutes, or my therapist told me my glutes are weak. Here's the thing. If you've had a stroke, you have lost a neural network. You have lost a network of neurons that control a specific movement. You haven't damaged what we call a peripheral nerve, which is what takes the signal from your brain to the muscle, right? So focusing on strengthening your glutes is not like the best advice. What I would say is you need to restore a movement pattern. Now, for different people, this is different. For some people, it's that they can't stand on that leg without their hip dropping. Okay, well then the best exercise you could focus on was stand on that leg without the hip dropping, right? That is restoring the neural network. That is where the root of the problem is. By thinking about strengthening your glute, that would be more consistent with someone who has damage to the little wire that takes the message from your spinal cord and takes it to the muscle. Okay, that's the side road, but the side road's not the issue. The main factory is the issue, right? So you need to restore a movement pattern, not necessarily like a specific muscle. And the glute seems to be the one that gets most of the attention, especially when it comes to walking. The next one is, and this one's a little bit controversial, and I've gone back and forth. I've given this cue quite a bit in my career, but is don't look down. I mean, we tell people not to look down. We put boards underneath them so they can't see the floor. The reality is we all look down. If we didn't, we would trip over obstacles that are on the floor. But we do it in a way where we look down like through our peripheral vision, and we're not turning our head down and our shoulders down to stare at the floor. So I think it's actually dangerous to not look at the floor. The trick is you want to look at the floor without bending over. Okay, maybe you even have to just tip your head down a little bit, but you're not bending your head forward. So my cue to people is if you need to look at the floor, look out in front of you about 10 feet and just glance down with your eyes, but not looking at the floor, or even like occasionally look straight down, but then lift your head back up, because some of you can't feel your feet, so you don't know where your foot is. So you do need to look down to make sure that you're setting your foot down safely. So I think it's bad advice to tell someone not to look down. So for any of you, I don't necessarily recommend that advice. I recommend looking down intermittently when you feel like potentially there's something coming up, and then all the time practicing trying to look down by just doing either little glances down with your eyes, paying attention that you're not dropping your head down or dropping your shoulders forward. These are just some things that have come up in person with patients, but have also come up in the comments quite a bit. So I just wanted to clear the air on some of these. But for any of you, what else have you been told in therapy that maybe you found wasn't super effective? Go ahead and put that in the comments. I would love to hear what some of you guys say. Maybe there's some things I'm missing, but more importantly, hopefully you can try some of the alternative cues that I've provided today, and that will improve your walking efficiency, your walking safety, and make your walking more enjoyable. But that is it for this video. I enjoyed spending time with you guys today, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good day.